One.
Thank you, Sean.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals, and this is the continued hearing on the application for the residences at East Milton Square. With me tonight are board members Jeffrey Mullen and Nick Gray, constituting the panel. The purpose of this meeting this evening, this being the 16th of December at 7 p.m., is to hear from Cliff Bomer with respect to architectural issues and the progress or lack thereof that we've had in the interim 4 or 5 weeks. And also the board did receive a report from Connor Nagel of VHB dealing with the Bassett Street sewer infrastructure capacity. It's been put on the website. I think it's around 11 pages long, and Jen Corcoran forwarded that to us, and we thank Ms. Corcoran for her courtesy, and I understand that Mr. Nagel will be on board this evening to discuss this, and I'm not sure whether Mr. Sean Reardon has had an opportunity to study this because it came in quite late this afternoon, but if Sean has any questions, he can certainly ask them, and likewise can take additional time to prepare his comments on Mr. Nagel's December 14, 2021 letter. It's to the board, but my memory is it may have come in on the 14th. I honestly don't. I have it on the 15th at noontime. So we thank Mr. Nagel for doing that. So I think the best way to start is to welcome Cliff Bomer back to the Board of Appeals, and perhaps we can get a status report as to how discussions have been ongoing with the applicant and what significant outstanding issues are still remain outstanding, perhaps why they remain outstanding, and whether there's movement between the parties to try to resolve these issues by agreement. So, Mr. Bomer, welcome back to the Board of Appeals. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise, it's good to see you too. I think that I'll give a very quick update on the latest communications we had with the development team, which was just 3 days ago. It was on Monday. Jennifer was on the call. The architect was on the call. Judy, Barrett, Tim, and I was on the call. And what we did was we walked through a memo that I'd written back in early December. I believe it was December. It was November 18th. It was a discussion points, hearing talking points. And the focus on the call on Monday was to walk all the way through those points and get the developer's current position on them. And I think I think in all fairness, there were some points that were made by the development team that they have had some concerns, I think particularly along the Franklin Street, that they felt were adequately addressed through change of materials, change of color to help break down the vertical scale of the building. It is rather long elevation. They did increase the setback somewhat. I think you know that the building did get moved further away from Franklin Street, which helps. The notion of mitigating scale through distance from the public realm, it works. It can definitely work, and they did make that effort. I think though, I'm happy to go into any level of detail that you want me to, but I think my overall feeling is that there are still several outstanding issues that I think have not been adequately addressed. And I think the frustration for me has been knowing that the level of completion of the documents at this point is really very early schematic design. And I know that when the public and maybe even the board sees renderings that look like real buildings, they may have a notion that the project is pretty well baked. But in fact, those materials can be produced very, very early in the design process and are helpful for really figuring out what the building will look like, the impact of the building, et cetera. So I think the frustration is knowing how early the project is as far as like opening up the development of the design to a broader team of consultants, which is really what eats up lots of time and money for the team. Even though we're very early on, there's been a consistent resistance, at least I felt a resistance to really exploring ideas that we have talked about, or if they had been explored, which has been represented, that ideas that we talked about were explored. We haven't seen any evidence of it, but at the same time representing that adopting some of the suggestions would make the project economically infeasible. It's just hard to correlate those things of knowing that it's in a very, very early design phase right now, knowing that that's where it is, knowing the representations have been made that certain things are simply not possible because of the economics of the project, but seeing no real evidence of what was looked at, how it was determined that it was uneconomic to make some of these changes or look at some of these changes. I think the frustration is probably that of all of the Milton proposals that I've reviewed, this one is arguably probably the most impactful in the public realm. It's almost an urban site. Many of the other developments that we've looked at really don't have the kind of neighbor impact that this one could have, and certainly not the pedestrian impact that this has given where it is, which kind of adds to the concern that the level of study of that public realm is lacking given where this building sits, the prominence of it, the scale of it. And again, how, in my opinion, how easily some of the issues could be addressed to make the building set a really good example for that kind of infill, or it's really kind of somewhere between transitional and infill site. So again, I'm happy to go into detail. I can very quickly say that the ongoing concerns, the significant ongoing concerns for me are the Franklin Street streetscape. I think the building is very minimally articulated volumetrically along Franklin Street. Some very simple moves of step backs in that facade could address those. Not even huge setbacks, but setbacks well designed and well placed. I think the building height along Franklin Street, I think it ranges, let's see, I can tell you. It ranges somewhere between something like 53 and 64 feet tall as you progress downhill. On Franklin Street, that's an unprecedented kind of experience in that environment. So I have, my fundamental issue is really not seeing a lot of study of that streetscape. There are a couple of perspective views, and actually I think I departed with the development team in the sense that I think views that they thought justified their position, in my mind, kind of justified the contrary. And I would direct you to the perspective views they provided in the latest package, on sheet, I think it's A902, some perspective views up the street. So I think on that subject, and there are one or two others, but on the discussion about studying articulation of that site, I think we reached an impasse on Monday. I wish it weren't that way, but I think it is. It's hard for me to not express what I believe, and I do believe that facade needs some additional work. The other issue that has come up.
Let's stop you there,
Sure.
Mr. Ballmer, if I can, so we'll keep things in reasonable focus here. And so let's talk about the Franklin streetscape. You mentioned to me, and this is the first time that I've heard this, that there's an impasse between the town peer reviewer, yourself, and the architect for the applicant. When you say that, are you suggesting that the applicant has declined to further refine or expand its streetscape and is just content with and insisting on the present streetscape that's been presented in the most recent drawings?
Well, I mean, and the applicant can speak for themselves, but what they represented in their response to my memo was that it would make the project uneconomic if they were to introduce articulation of the massing on Franklin Street. I think it's been, well, it's in the memo. That I'm not sure who authored all of the entries on the memo, but it was a response that I received on the 2nd of December. It was from the architect's office, but again, I doubt the architect really made the determination that it was uneconomic.
Okay. Well, let me ask you: did with respect to the streetscape, with whom were you speaking on behalf of the applicant? Was it a group of people, or was it just DeMello Schaefer? Or
well, on our call on Monday, it was the developer and it was the architect who reiterated the point that they made in their December 2nd letter.
Let me ask you this question, and I don't mean to put you to the test, and
That's okay.
I certainly have to admit my lack of experience in these matters. I actually read the December 2nd, 2021 DeMello Schaefer report, I'll call it. And we had Mr. Valdez present at our last hearing, and he didn't go through the entire letter because we had a shortage of time, but he went through 4 or 5 of the most significant issues that he thought needed to be addressed. All, of course, subject to your further meeting with him and your further report. When I read the December 2nd, 2021 report, I must have missed it somewhere, but I didn't see anywhere in this report an assertion by DeMello Schaefer or the project sponsors or the applicant that any of the things that you had requested were not economically feasible. Am I missing something there, or is this something that is a buzzword that's come up?
No, I could easily imagine missing that. I'll direct you to the line item. Bear with me while I run through it.
That would set off sirens in my head if I read it, but I could have gone over my.
Right. Hold on.
I thought they were saying in this letter that somehow some of these things weren't necessary, or they thought they had met the intent of what you were suggesting. And
well, and as I said, that to the degree that they did change materials and colors, uh, I did. We talked about that on Monday, and that is absolutely the case. But hold on, I'll find it. Yeah, I'm not seeing it yet, but it's
yes,
there.
yeah, I thought this letter was very well prepared by Mr. Valdez, and he was trying to parse some of your suggestions, to disagree with some of them as not necessary. But I didn't see any lines being drawn in the sand on this, and therefore I thought that the meeting that you'd have was.
I'll find the reference.
Well, let me ask you this then, without passing the words of the December 2nd, 2021 letter of the architect, Tamela Schaefer. What evidence, if any, did Mr. Valdez or anybody on behalf of the applicant indicate to you that some of these changes were uneconomic, and what the economic consequences were, whether they were actually studied, or this was merely a talking point or a complaint that they were making? Did they hand you any documents or studies?
No. And I think that was kind of my point, is that to make an argument that to study things or to make certain moves in the building would make it uneconomic, one would expect to see what it is that they've looked at, and looked at whatever the numbers are that they got that told them that it was uneconomic, or comparable projects where they found that to be the case. The frustration was not seeing any evidence of any studies being made, and therefore not really being able to understand whether the kinds of changes we're talking about really would make it uneconomic.
Okay, I see Mr. Freeman. I think Peter had his hand up. Mr. Freeman, do you want to be heard on this issue of some of these things being uneconomic?
I do several things, and I certainly don't want to make it argumentative, but there are several things that have to be kept in mind. There has been back and forth. It was just 2 hearings ago where Mr. Beamer, maybe it was before that, Mr. Beamer publicly stated that he didn't think it was appropriate for him to talk to our architect or other consultants outside the hearing. You gave a directive that was okay, but it still didn't happen until after the last hearing, okay? And Mr. Valdez testified at the last hearing that he had tried to reach Mr. Bomer and there was no response. So I just cannot accept that there is any responsibility on my client's part for some type of lack of response to Mr. Bomer, number one. Number two, I have done 150 projects, okay, 40B projects.
I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry for you.
And the level of, it keeps the adrenaline. It's simply not accurate to say, both physically for this project and under 40B, that the development level of these architectural plans are inadequate, are so early. That's what he said several times, Mr. Bowman, tonight, that they're so early on that it's hard to really see the assessment and the study. They are right on at the correct level, and nobody, including your 40B consultant, has ever said, and tonight is just Mr. Beamer who's saying that they're so early on. Nobody has ever said that they're insufficient. They are of the adequate, and I don't even mean minimal, but they are of the adequate, very typical level of architectural plans for this phase. And we have presented many renderings. We have presented the scaled dimension plans with the facades and floor plans, all of which is typical. And I just can't sit here and let it be said without my strong rebuttal, that that's simply not accurate. It appears that he's not satisfied, but it's the proper level of design at this stage. And to go through his letter, literally one of the things that he said, and he couldn't find, but I found it, but it's part of 2736 comments. So let me read to you. And before I read, the intent clearly from Mr. DeMella, if not as precise perhaps as he could have been, what we have said is part of the articulation on Franklin Street, the facade on Franklin Street, has always been in Mr. Boehmer's mind a question of further setback from Franklin, even though we already moved it back, and also some discussion, I believe, about possible lowering the height or stepping back the height on that side. And that's where it gets into uneconomic. If we do things like that, we would lose a whole bunch of units. And, you know, we've said that from day one, and it's true. And it's not I don't care what he talks about. He can talk about economics if he wants to, but that's not his bailiwick. And it's late in the day to get into the fact that some type of design change that clearly would cause a loss of units is not acceptable. I mean, it's our position. If the board ultimately doesn't think that what we proposed is approvable, or put some conditions, you know, then certainly you have to make your informed decision. And you've all been very, very fair and methodical, and we appreciate it. But I can't sit here, especially with a very great generalization based on one comment. Mr. DeMella's comments, when you group them all together, have clearly been aimed at the setbacks and substantial changes to the facade.
I'm sorry.
Number 20, if I may just read,
sure.
Mr. DeMella wanted to read. Applicant states that increased setbacks would render the project infeasible. And we said that at further 10 above. It also has impacts on the building, entrance to the building from the back, reduced parking, and impact deliveries drop-off area. So that's a very specific response. I think what Mr. Boehmer, I would say candidly, cherry picking, he's literally correct. Number 25, applicant states, the first section is Mr. Boehmer's. Applicant states that further articulation of the massing, particularly along Franklin Street, would make the project infeasible. And again, articulation, Frank generally meant he said respond to above. And then the one that increased setbacks, again, he was talking about setbacks, and that's what Mr. Valdez referred to. And then the literal one that I found a second ago, and of course now I can't find it, but it is there. Literally, what Mr. Boehmer said. It was not a misrepresentation. I just think it's cherry picking.
That's number 26. Right.
Well, yeah. There was also one where you had mentioned, you know, things like color and materials and things like that. It might be possible to change. I'll go out on a limb and speak for my client. Mr. Valdez isn't here. But, you know, the intent that I'll end here is clearly not to say that we haven't considered any things. We have said that we can't make big structural changes or setback changes to the building, but can we work on color and things like that? You know, yeah. So I just think that there's been an unfortunate, I don't know why, I really don't. I know Mr. Boehmer, I worked with him on other projects and he's very capable, and I'm not meaning to criticize him personally, but I just think it's a very inaccurate portrayal of what my client has done, what Frank Valdez had done and tried to do, and where we're at. So thank you.
Well, let me ask you one more question, because Mr. Boehmer in a few minutes is going to go on to other issues that deal with the architectural aspects of the project. Are there any other aspects of the project, Mr. Freeman, that the applicant is contending make this project economically unfeasible? Other than the setting back of the building, is that really the main issue, or are there a panoply of other issues that the applicant is contending make the project economically unfeasible?
I'll let Jen chime in as well, but in general, what you said is correct. If the building remains functional the way we designed it, including the garage and including the current design, so that we can keep, Jen, what's our number now at the number of units? Well, the number
of units is at 95 total.
95, sorry. I have so many projects, including one at 6. So right before this 90, so 95 units. Um, the only other thing that comes to mind, which could get into conditions, and when we discuss later with Mr. Nagel and Mr. Reardon, the stuff about the Weston and Sampson proposal for sewer system studies. Not to get into that, but we don't think that the second phase is necessary. It costs a lot of money. I'm not saying that that would make the whole project unfeasible, but just to raise that since you asked for the type of things that we might object to. So, I think it does come down to the height of the building and the setbacks and the step back that we do have. Jen, you can correct me or add something if I miss something.
Yeah, through the chair.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I just wanted to clarify, add some specifics to what Mr. Bomer had said. So what we had discussed, he mentioned here articulation, but really what we were focused on in the meeting on Monday was the setback. And specifically, we did say that any increase to the setback of the building in its entirety is infeasible, as is treating the Franklin Street facade with the same treatment as we did on the Bassett Street facade, which included just a single loaded corridor as opposed to a double loaded corridor. So one of the suggestions that Mr. Bomer made was that, from the top 2 floors of the building, so floors 5 and 6 would be stepped back. He mentioned on Monday, anywhere from 5 to 10 feet even. So maybe not an entire row of units. However, if we were to increase that setback by even 5 to 10 feet, that would represent a loss of those units completely because of the widths and the depths of the units that are required to make them livable. And so the suggestion that Mr. Bomer made in his comments that we responded to on October 22nd in that package was to do that. And we stated explicitly there that the loss of 12 units would represent a change in the project that would make it infeasible. So just to kind of clarify what we mean by that, the net operating income of the building, so the amount of money that the building is making, if you take away 12 units, the cost of the building doesn't really go down significantly enough to justify that. And so it's kind of a numerator denominator issue where the denominator would stay the same, but the numerator would get significantly lower, and that would make it infeasible to the point that we wouldn't be able to get it, funded by a bank. So just wanted to add some clarification to that.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, great, Cliff.
Okay. 2 things. One is I don't think it's accurate to state that there's any surprise in talking about step backs versus setbacks. I just want to set the record straight on that. If you looked 7 months ago at my letter on May 30th, page 5, top bullet, create more articulation in the north-south wing of the building along Franklin Street. Building elevations indicated a change of color in the siding material along that elevation that matches the height of the wing along Bassett, but this would be much more effective if the top 2 stories are stepped back several feet. This modification, combined with the entire footprint of that wing moving towards the west to create more buffering space, would greatly improve the streetscape on Franklin. This discussion has been on the table for 7 months, and I've seen no evidence of studying that, considering it, creating a step back there, perhaps decreasing the step back on the Bassett Street elevation could result in the loss of 0 units. So that's my second point, actually, is there was no point on Monday's discussion where I suggested they lose 12 more units. I think a decision that was made very early on, and we discussed this on Monday, was that there was some pushback from Mass Housing about accommodating or articulating the Bassett Street elevation to mitigate the scale of the building, which was a spot-on recommendation from Mass Housing. That doesn't automatically lead to a single loaded corridor scheme to address the issues. So I don't agree with believing that creating a step back along Franklin Street would result in the loss of units, particularly if it's combined with rethinking the single loaded part of the building along Bassett Street.
Okay, well, let me.
Mr. Chairman, it's Attorney Robert Galvin. Could I weigh in on this particular issue?
Yes, you can, Bob.
Okay. I'm going to try to be blunt. Okay. From the neighborhood's perspective, they've set the building back 4 feet further on Franklin Street to create a sidewalk, which was always necessary. They've modestly altered the interior parking area, but not increased the amount of on-site parking. They've slightly altered an internal triangle or on the surface parking area to provide some loading area for a box truck that would not be able to make a turning movement. And other than that, they haven't done anything to reduce the density of this project, which is obviously a problem because they don't have enough parking spaces. They can't control their stormwater in a manner that complies with the stormwater management regulations. And most specifically, this building is the largest building in East Milton. It dominates everything. And to hear without any evidence of a pro forma that this project is now uneconomic because someone says, make it fit into the neighborhood a little better, it just really bothers me. And I know it bothers all of my clients because it just doesn't make any sense. And I think if the board is being told that they can't do anything to accommodate their slightest concerns, my clients' concerns, the board ought to examine the pro forma and test the accuracy of the representations that any such changes render this project uneconomic. Because my first request would be that the board consider an alteration of the density of this project to make this building comply with state regulations, fit into this neighborhood in a reasonable way, and not so dominate this neighborhood that it just destroys the fabric of this neighborhood.
Let me do this. Mr. Freeman, go ahead.
Just real briefly, I have to pause and count to 10. I guess that's also being blunt. It is simply a gross exaggeration by Mr. Galvin to state that we can't comply with stormwater regulations. We're just about done with that with Mr. Reardon's acknowledgement. And I think there's one relatively minor thing that we're waiting for that was discussed last time, which we said we'd agree to a condition. So it's simply not at all accurate to state that we can't comply and we're not complying with the stormwater regulations, number one. Number two, parking has been addressed a lot. Jen has some data later, if you'd like it, about other, I think it was in the East Milton, the town vision or planning. Jen, maybe, well, we'll wait till later. But, you know, there can be a difference of opinion. Again, I respect the board, and ultimately it is your, call it heavy burden, to weigh the different sides and come up with a decision based on what you think is right and important, balancing the housing need against the local needs. The one-on-one and we're slightly higher ratio is not at all uncommon for projects like this. And so I'm not going to say that Mr. Galvin's wrong, but it is wrong to assert that that's a deal breaker for the number of units we have. As to the architecture, including the last point that Mr. Boehmer made, you know, two things. What appears to be happening is that we haven't satisfied the neighbors and we haven't satisfied Mr. Boehmer. If that's the case, so be it. I respect that. But we've said that we've done all we can, and there have been changes by Mr. Valdez along the way. But most importantly, although I know that the public and the board was not involved at the early stage of the project eligibility, but we had a 105 unit project and a really major design difference. And we changed it to what was it down to, Jen? But we made the building change way back at the beginning. Yeah. So, you know, so I know that that wasn't within the, you know, months of hearings before the board, but there was already a significant nod to the community by my client. So I respect everybody's difference of opinions. I certainly don't mind that. And you know, that always happens with 40B. I don't think it's helpful for anybody to make the characterizations about my clients uncooperativeness or not, you know, making more changes. Again, and not you, anybody who knows me, and I think I've exhibited it in the process of this hearing, and you've heard my client as well, you know, we have tried to work with everybody. We don't like to draw lines in the sand, but at the end of a hearing process, which we're at, you know, that's what happens. So if there are brilliant design changes that can be suggested that don't cause a significant loss of units, then perhaps it would be considered. But, you know, I'm told by my professionals that the kinds of changes that Mr. Boehmer was suggesting would result in that. Plus the fact, if you want to look at the pro forma, you have it. It was part of the Pell application and it's part of the record in this case. You can certainly look at it. It's a thin, you know, project profit within the typical 40B feasibility guidelines on return as it is, but they want to go forward. And, you know, in terms of costs, I don't need to tell anybody that costs just continue to go up and, you know, we're still going forward trying to get the permit. So by all means, Bob, you can look at the pro forma. Anybody else can. So
Let me ask you this, Mr. Freeman, because I think the pro forma that you're talking about is probably well over a year old by now, for many reasons. Not 30%. So that let me ask you this: do you or Ms. Corcoran have a current development pro forma that you want to share with the Board of Appeals, and of course, Mr. Galvin, that is current, that demonstrates the portions of the project changes that the applicant believes make the project not economically feasible? Do you have such a document, or will you produce such a document on those matters where you are claiming economic non-feasibility, so that we can consider that, and so Mr. Boehmer can consider it as well?
Okay, so several responses.
Yeah.
If we need to continue, which, you know, perhaps we will tonight, although we're getting there, you know, we have no problem putting something together. It's a little bit shooting in the dark. We can, you know, perhaps tie some of the changes that we think Mr. Boehmer is suggesting, and have our architect work with Jen on you know, what we think is the impact in terms of number of units from changes that have been discussed. And I don't want to go out on a limb and speak for my client, but if we could really make those changes and you know, satisfy Mr. Boehmer and not sacrifice units, I think we'd all crack open a bottle of champagne, my team. So I will say this, you know, with Zoom, I can't talk privately to my client. We'll certainly consider that. We have, you know, it's a question of timing, and can we do it realistically with a frank projecting how many units would be lost? I would have no problem, and I'm sure my client will, with sharing something like that with you. What I can tell you is we're not going to continue. We're not going to agree to have you hire a consultant, another consultant to review it, which would take weeks to get lined up and weeks for them to prepare and multiple hearings. It's late in the game to do that. And, you know, it's so self-obvious. I grant you, yes, Mr. Leonard, of course, you know, we're familiar with project numbers all the time. I can tell you that the cost of the project probably has gone up by, you know, 10 to 30% since a year ago. And that's keeping it at the level that it's at. And I respect that. Again, you know, you're not, and I don't mean that the board should be experienced, but yes. So, you know, we would be willing to do that unless my team afterwards says, you know, it just doesn't, we don't know how to do it. But there's nothing that we're trying to hide. But I'm not going to recommend.
Nobody's suggesting you're trying to hide anything.
No, I know that, but, you know, but when Mr. Gavin insinuates that, you know, we don't budge and, you know, we're throwing out numbers, you know, I don't like that. So
you may not,
what I'm
saying, in all candor, Mr. Freeman, I think that one thing I don't like is you're telling the board what it cannot do or should not do in terms of seeking competent advice on the issue of economic.
I understand that when we're past 180 days, I respect that if it's at your prerogative. I didn't mean to state that to be offensive. I was just being honest and upfront and candid that, happy to share things with you, but to take another month or two to go through peer review and financial, I'm just telling you respectfully, we're not going to agree to that. If you have to deny the project, then I respect what you do with your ultimate wisdom. It's just axiom.
Maybe we'll approve the project, but put conditions on it that you don't like. And
that
then
may be.
You can spend 3 years in the appeals court trying to what are your costs going to be if you go through 3 to 5 years of litigation on this project, as opposed to dealing with it in a reasonable and rational sense?
I agree. We certainly want to be reasonable and rational, and I appreciate that. That's a very valid comment, and I will certainly remember that, because I agree. That's always my approach. It just seems that certain things, I don't know why, but certain things have seemed to me to get just mischaracterized. That's all. So, okay. But I absolutely respect the board. I do respect the board, and I wasn't trying to, be offensive. So thank you. I
accept that, and I understand that. I think what I'd like to do is proceed in this manner. I'd like to hear from my fellow board members as to where we are right now on this issue. And then, so we can continue to make progress, I'd like to again hear from Mr. Bomer on some of the other principal concerns that he has. So we'll have those on the record, so you'll be familiar with what they are, and maybe progress can be made on those issues. Does that make sense to you, Mr. Freeman?
Oh, sure, that's fine. Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, great. So Mr. Mullen, are you there, and do you want to be heard on this economic unfeasibility issue and the Franklin Street scope of the project?
Sure. Thanks, John. I think the public realm issues are probably the #1 local concern, or certainly one of the major local concerns that have emerged in this hearing, given the property's location in the square and the urban nature of the proposal. So I appreciate Mr. Bomer's point. With respect to the comment from Mr. Freeman about it being late in the game, I understand the 180-day issue, but I don't think it's late in the game. I think we've just arrived at the point where we can ask for the pro forma, having met the conditions in the regulations. So I think we've just tonight have gotten to the point where conditions have been requested and that sound in local concerns and have been rejected on the basis of the project being uneconomic. I really think it should be looked at so that we're better informed. So I would definitely urge us to take a closer look at the financial package here, so as to understand whether this issue, which I think is so central to the whole project, is truly going to cause the project to be uneconomic. That's my sense.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Nick Gray, you want to be heard on this issue?
I think briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would agree with Mr. Mullen. The massing of this project has concerned me from the beginning, and I understand the developers need to have the requisite number of units. Obviously, we need the project to be economic. It seems to have boiled down to this evening. From what if I'm understanding this correctly, it's basically the visual and the impact of this building to the neighborhood be addressed in some way that maintains its financial viability. And I haven't heard testimony on that other than just assertions. And so the more information that we can get to that, to me, that is the central question of this project. And so I'd like as much information on that topic as possible in order to arrive at the best possible decision. I guess the other question is, maybe this is not the time to ask it, but I was wondering, is there any number of units, reduction in units that would be feasible? And if so, maybe it's not appropriate to ask that question, but it was sort of implied that 12 is too many and 95 would be better, and you've already reduced it some. I'm just trying to figure out, is there some wiggle room, some number that would maintain project viability and address some of Mr. Bowman's concerns? That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Raymond. Peter, yeah.
Just real briefly, I promise. As you were speaking, Mr. Gray, I actually agree 100% with what you said. And, perhaps I overstated in my zealousness for my client, where I was coming from. But I absolutely agree that I can see that you folks want to see the pro formas. I'll ignore whether or not there might be too much time for peer review. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, and I do apologize. But I agree 100% with what Mr. Gray just said. And I was thinking, that we could actually, since we may not know exactly what the architectural change would be, that perhaps we could put together pro formas that would say, okay, here's what we're proposing on the current costs, here's what the return looks like, the feasibility. Here's a budget when we reduce 6 units. Here's a budget when we reduce 12 units. Maybe we can do a few iterations. Basically, I was thinking along the lines that Mr. Gray had just stated. So, I'll talk with my clients about that after the hearing. And I do realize that totally reasonable to want to see what that impact is. So, we'll certainly work with you on that.
But I think that's productive and would be very helpful. And I may be exhibiting my amateurish self here, but it would seem to me that I don't know whether that's the work of architects to do that type of analysis or whether there's some specialty that does it. But it would seem to me that this was something that could be looked at by somebody of goodwill very, very quickly and come to some very basic conclusions. I don't think we're talking rocket science on this. And I think if the board did seek some type of a consultant, we could certainly do it without further delaying this process.
Yeah, agreed. Yes, we can certainly do it quickly on our end. Sure.
Okay, so do you agree with me, Mr. Freeman, then the best way to continue here, so we're making progress, is to have Mr. Bowman continue with his analysis of other major issues, and then we can get your comments. And
absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I think this has been a helpful but unexpected exchange.
Understood. Thank you. I agree.
Okay. So, Mr. Ballmer?
If you don't mind me piling on just a teeny bit more,
just a little bit,
to a comment you made, is that the architect's role in helping to determine cost impact of changes would be to provide a suitable sketch that could be examined by generally a contractor who could look at it, who could really give you a more accurate idea about pricing. Most architects don't wade into that territory with any level of confidence. And I would point out, having just from my own experience, making changes that can really effectively address the impact the building has in the public realm. And I appreciate Mr. Mullen's comments about the public realm. That is my main issue, is how this building creates a kind of unprecedented environment in Milton, and secondarily, what kind of example it sets for future type of development in denser parts of the town. So that's really the thing that is most important to me.
Okay. And before you go on, let me do one thing, because I don't want to make a misstep here. I'd like to ask Tim Sawinski, the town planner of the town of Milton, whether he wants to be heard on this economic feasibility or unfeasibility, and the way we're proceeding, that Mr. Freeman is going to talk to his client about producing a development pro forma for us. on a relatively fast basis so we can begin that type of analysis. Tim, do you want to be heard on that issue before we get on to other issues?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, I don't disagree with anything that the board has kind of mentioned here. I think, you know, I'm not, and I don't think the board is concerned with the number of, I don't think we're talking about reducing units for the sake of reducing units. I think there's a physical impact that we're talking about mitigating. You know, I'm a firm believer that there are design solutions to be found everywhere. And I think, you know, and Mr. Freeman, I appreciate your comments there about, you know, trying to find that kind of wiggle space. You know, it's not about if you can fit the number of units that you need. I think you're obviously going to try to do that. And I don't think that's what we're after is a reduction in units. I think it's just, you know, there's a physical impact. There are only so many ways that you could, you know, mitigate that on a narrow street. So, you know, we'd like to see it. And if it's truly impossible, I think, you know, the board, and not speaking for the board, but, you know, I think we just need to see the evidence that, you know, yeah, we tried it, can't work, can't do it. I think that makes the board's decision making a little bit, you know, not that you're here to make things easy for the board, although maybe you should, but it makes the decision a little bit easier to say like, okay, this is a legitimate thing. And you know, unless we want to sort of blow up the project, which I think, you know, this has the potential to be a really good project that I think is very desirable for the town. I think we're all just trying to get there. So, you know, these have been tough discussions. So I appreciate everyone kind of approaching it in good faith and candor. Yeah, I agree with everything the board said, and I think we can probably get there. But definitely want to hear more from Mr. Bomer on the rest of his issues.
Great, thanks, Mr. Zawinski. We appreciate your comments. Mr. Bomer, do you want to pick up the ball and pick up the second?
Yeah. Well, I'll just finish up that the thought about unit counting. Tim said exactly what I was going to say. I don't think there's been any comments that I've made that directly lead to cutting back on the number of units. I think there are ways of redistribute if to the degree that the volume of the building directly correlates to the number of units. Then the question is, how do you distribute the volume of that building? How do you sculpt that building to be the most compatible with the context? So I would argue that you don't automatically have to go to loss of units. You would look more at redistributing volume to make it fit in better as a physical object. As far as other, I think it really, after lots of discussions, it's become clear to me the other item that just hasn't gone away is I'm still not believing that the solution for drop off and pickup, move-ins, potentially even emergency response, I'm just not convinced that that's really been resolved. And I think the solutions that I would suggest probably have a negative impact from other people who would look at the project. My own solution would be to turn that courtyard into really not a whole lot more than a drop-off delivery entry courtyard, lose a number of parking spaces, but make it actually function. The reason that that's my number two concern is, there are a family of issues that do impact the public realm. Those to me are the most important. Then there's another family of issues that really impacts the future residents of the building. And that is kind of a problem that I think is up to the development team to really anticipate and figure out whether they want to deal with that level of kind of inconvenience that can be created by service areas that are really inadequate. So that's my perspective. There were some other related issues about putting the transformer in the middle of the courtyard, whether the utility would really find that acceptable. My own experience has been utilities are very fussy about wanting very good, what feels like excessive access to their equipment. But more than just some of the purely technical details of headroom through that entryway to get the kind of equipment that the utility might want to see, it really is just a functional problem I have with the courtyard, with another associated issue of probably some privacy issues in those apartments that are directly facing that courtyard and facing those parking spaces. Beyond that, I think the kind of normal level of issues can be resolved during the further development of the project. There's a small handful of those that actually go all the way back to my original letter. But those are really my two issues, is the drop-off pickup situation, deliveries, and the massing. Some changes in the massing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions of Mr. Bomer on his the second point and the rest of his testimony?
No, I just encourage him to stay at it.
Okay, great. Mr. Gray, any questions?
No, but thank you very much for his comments.
Okay. Mr. Freeman, do you have any questions of Mr. Bomer on his second point?
No, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Bob Galvin, do you have any questions of Mr. Bomer?
I don't, but I just want to let the board know that, you know, I've attended all but 2 meetings when I had somebody else attending in front of me, or for me. And from the beginning, I've told everybody that I was the point of contact for the neighborhood. And the board needs to know that there were several meetings where there were no changes to this project. So the timing is very much a product of their not altering their plans. And then lastly, we have not had a single communication from the developer telling us how they would want to interact with us or tell us what they're willing to do to satisfy our concerns. And that's not acceptable to my clients. We should have been at least invited to participate in the process or ask what we thought about the process. And I understand the board has its own process, but our concerns have been the very same from the beginning, and they're just not addressed. And I think, regrettably, it's a project that I think I heard doesn't yet comply with the stormwater management regulations, which is my point. It's a project that will have a flooding impact, doesn't have enough parking, and maybe needs less parking in the back, according to what I just heard from Mr. Bomer. These are the things they should come to us about and get our interactive comments with. And I just think it's not a good way to proceed, because we are not obviously the developer, but we wanted and have always wanted to be interactive with them to come up with the best project for everyone and a balanced project for everybody. And it just hasn't happened.
Let Mr. Galvin, let me just ask you this, as we can continue with this process, and hopefully, and I agree with Mr. Freeman, would like to do this faster rather than slower. Does the neighborhood association whom you represent intend to be introducing any technical experts regarding its position in this matter?
Yes, online with me tonight, and she's been with me in at least a couple of other hearings, is Susan Spratt, who's a professional engineer, civil engineer with McKinsey Engineering Group. We had desperately hoped that after peer review, including the comments by Mr. Bomer, Mr. Reardon, and others, there would be some significant changes to the building. And because the applicant is not making any material changes to the building, the answer is yes, we will, and we will do that at the next meeting, and we will explain to you where we think the holes in this project still are. And I think Mr. Bowman hit it right on the head. I think they need to step back this building along Franklin Street and provide the same type of relief that they've provided along Bassett. And without that, you've got a 6-story wall, some 65 to 70 feet tall, across the street from buildings that are 2.5 stories. And that is towering above them. And it'll shade those buildings afternoon time every half of the year. And I think that's another problem. So the answer is yes, we are going to submit a narrative letter. I had one done before, but then the applicant indicated that they were going to potentially consider changes to the project, so I didn't submit it. I could submit it tonight if you wanted, but I think we were hoping that sometime before now they would make some material changes and would be talking about the project that we hoped that they would build, which was something that addressed the parking, the drainage, the offsite issues that we've talked.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit, Mr. Galvin.
It hasn't happened, so we'd be ready at the next.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're trying to reach agreements here on some of these issues and to discuss these issues in good faith. Why wouldn't it be appropriate for you to produce Ms. Spratt's letter report or an updated version of it, so that Mr. Freeman and Mr. Bomer will be able to take those opinions and comments into consideration when they're discussing their issues? Doesn't that make
we would agree to do that.
Clear and more efficient? Because we don't want to have.
We would agree. We would agree to do that.
Okay. Well, I wish you. Thank you very much. Then, if you could circulate that, within the next day or two, that would really be helpful. Because what I really don't want to see is have Mr. Bomer do his analysis again, talk with Mr. Valdez, talk with other disciplines, come up with some reasonable solution, and then all of a sudden, Ms. Spratt produces a report that requires prolonged and continued negotiations. We'd like to know what your position is sooner rather than later, so that it can be considered. Whether it's rejected or not, that's up to the experts and not the board. But I think the party should have the benefit of Ms. Susan Spratt's analysis sooner rather than later. And I appreciate your willingness.
So what I could do, a reasonable opportunity to update it in light of the fact that the plans have somewhat changed, particularly in stormwater, and would be happy to highlight the remaining deficiencies from our perspective and what we think that the board should do with that. And we'll do that, forthwith.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's gracious, and it will be, in my opinion, extremely helpful to all of the parties in this proceeding. I think as far as Mr. Bomer's presentation is concerned, that he's completed his presentation. So is it feasible for everybody to pivot, I guess is the expression of the day, to the Connor Nagel's report of December 14, 2022 regarding his analysis of the Bassett Street sewer infrastructure capacity.
Mr. Chair, can I just make one quick quick point?
Mrs. Zawinski, yes, please.
Yeah, just before we get away from and I know we had some kind of just before we get away from the courtyard issue, one thing that we talked about at the meeting on Monday, and I just want to sort of get it on the record so people are thinking about it, by way of potential conditions. as it relates to the loading, the deliveries, the operations of the courtyard and the parking lot. We did talk a little bit about the potential for a submission of some type of operations plan for parking and loading. A lot of the solutions kind of proposed by the applicant as it relates to move-ins, as it relates to sort of large deliveries, are kind of operational and management based, which is not uncommon or unheard of or inappropriate. But I think if there's not physical design changes that address the concerns of the board, we should at least have on hand in some form the kind of operational and management kind of tactics that the applicant intends to deploy to solve some of the parking and loading issues.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Let me, Mr. Freeman, does that make sense to you? Is that something that can be produced?
In fact, it was just completed. I was going to say, or Jen was going to say later, Tim's absolutely right. And so Jen and her team did prepare that parking management plan. Jen and I had kind of hypothesized that she would present that verbally tonight, the highlights, but given the fact that we will, again, certainly your pleasure, Mr. Chairman, we can do that. But, I think it might have just been emailed. We certainly know nobody could have looked at it. But whichever you want, if you want to just hold it for the next hearing, that's fine. If you would like Jen to go into it briefly tonight, she can.
No, I think, well, let's do this. Let's see how long it takes Mr. Nagel to do his presentation and answer some questions regarding his analysis. And I understand that Mr. Sean Reardon, our peer reviewer, may also need some additional time to comment on this report. But let's make as much progress as we can with Mr. Nagel. See what the time is, and if we can fit in Ms. Corcoran, we will do it. Otherwise, we'll suspend and go into our next hearing.
Sure.
Okay, so how do you want to proceed with respect to Mr. Nagel?
Probably, if it's okay with you, to have Connor just go through his letter and the other, developments on the things that came up at the last hearing, because there have been some developments, some we think positive, nothing negative, perhaps just time constraints in terms of not tons of information yet. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Nagel.
Great, Mr. Nagel, welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. For the record, Connor Nagel with VHB. What I submitted yesterday was a letter of my findings in reviewing CCTV footage from 2016 provided by the DPW. I believe at that time they reviewed the system all through there with intent of putting it on the town's capital improvements program. In my findings of that, the sewer line appears to be have adequate capacity for our project, included calculations to that effect. I emailed it directly to Mr. Reardon, as well as Jen submitting it to the board. Mr. Reardon was kind enough to take a quick look at it and give me some comments, and we are working on addressing that. We have connected with DPW today, and within the next week should be able to complete the comments that Mr. Reardon had suggested to update this and give a fuller response on this item. We've also completed a hydrant flow test. The flows look adequate to me, but as a civil engineer, it's not my decision to sort of say they are. That information has been provided to the architecture review with their MEP to confirm that they feel there's adequate pressure there, so that we can make a statement on that and provide the hydrant flow test with that statement. And I'm aware that we owe an updated final plan to complete the drainage connection on Franklin Street that we had discussed at the last hearing, keeping that on the property to get further down along the Franklin Street drainage line to complete that. And so that's really the update on the civil side.
Okay, and is it fair to say that your study indicated, based on the calculations that you performed, that the existing pipe has sufficient capacity to accommodate the proposed project flow?
Yes, but Mr. Erden did request a couple of other items to confirm that, so we're going to get those done.
Okay, great. So that for any member of the public who wants to read your report of December 14th, 2001, it should be on the website with all of the attachments and supporting data.
Yes, and a updated version will be submitted just as soon as we complete the inspection with DPW.
Okay, great. Thank you very, very much. Let me ask the board members whether they have any questions, at least preliminarily on your December 14th, 2021 report. Mr. Mullins, do you have any questions of Mr. Nagel?
No questions, John.
Okay, how about Nick Gray, please?
Could I just confirm that what I understand to be the case in your letter is in fact right? So that the capacity of the existing pipe is the sewer line is 830,000 gallons a day. That
yes.
Right? That okay.
Approximately, yes.
Approximately, yeah. I'm sorry. I mean, and I'm looking at one of the page of your letter where you did the water sewer generation calculation. And if I'm interpreting this correctly, the existing dwellings and buildings and uses on that street generate 1,670 gallons per day. And
no, that would be the existing project footprint.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
three dwellings,
you.
I believe,
Yep.
in the office.
All right, that
not
makes
the entire sewer catchment.
Sorry, that makes more sense. All right. So, but the new construction of the new building at 145 bedrooms would produce 14,280 gallons per day. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So basically 8.5 or something times the sewage that comes from the existing buildings. I'm just doing the math. It's
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm right there. So, okay. That's all I got, I guess. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Mr. Reardon, do you want to make any preliminary comments on Mr. Nagel's May 14th, December 14th, 2021 report?
Yeah, sure. So first what I'd make is it's the information that we got was convenient. That was great that the town had that. It seems to indicate that there's a small portion of the capacity being used currently. My principal comment to Connor was that the information was from 2016. We think it's a good idea to have some current information and not rely on just information that was created for another purpose and for another effort. That the project needs to do something that's current and basically the engineer of record has to have eyes on the situation. So a little bit of data from them on that. And again, what we're talking about is something very simple: pop a few manhole covers, take a few pictures, do a few inspection reports, just to make sure that there's no visual evidence that things are different now than they were in 2016. And then just to streamline some of the calculations to Mr. Gray's point, it is a little bit more complicated because there are peaks and other things like that and II considerations that need to be evaluated when trying to determine whether or not there's going to be flow issues. So to reiterate that, there's no sort of obvious or impending problem that we're concerned about, just looking for a little bit more documentation to sort of tidy things up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Reardon. Tim Sawinski, do you have any questions or comments on Mr. Nagel's report?
I don't. It looks like I had expected Marina Fernandez, the town engineer, to be here. I know that she was also on childcare duty tonight, so she might have been juggling a couple kids and popped off. But DPW and engineering have received the report. We'll probably touch base with Sean next week to kind of get our heads together on that. So I don't have anything to report, but we'll have something for the next hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I hope we didn't scare Ms. Fernandez away. But
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, if I could add one more thing.
Yes, Mr. Ridden. Yeah.
Just in regard to the water, I appreciate the fact that they're doing fire flow tests. The one thing I just want to make clear, we're not terribly concerned about the ability of the water supply to supply the building. What we're most concerned about is if there's a fire occurrence or something that happens at the building, we want to make sure that the neighborhood is not adversely affected. So we're not only considering the needs of the building, we're considering what impacts the building would have on the neighborhood if they had a fire. So for example, if you have a fire at the building and there's a large extraction of water from the local network, will that cause pressure problems? Will it cause backflow problems in the neighborhood? So that's the main question we're looking to have answered. Great,
Understood. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Mr. Nagel. We appreciate your testimony and your report. Mr. Freeman, it's 20 minutes after 8. I think we do have time to hear from Ms. Corcoran if you will want to offer her comments.
Sure, thank you. Jen?
Sure, yeah, so I'm sorry that this wasn't submitted sooner. We'll submit it hopefully maybe tomorrow. We're just trying to get final comment from our consultants and just make sure that we've, addressed all the board and its consultants' concerns adequately. But
Let me ask you one thing. Are you comfortable talking about that now, or do you prefer to confer with your consultant before you preliminarily testify as to what you're going to do?
Yeah, no, this is fine. This actually, a lot of this memo, it centers around just kind of the parking and loading concerns. And so points, several points that were made already concerning, where things are loaded from and how, also goes into just the justification for the, 1-to-1 plus parking ratio that we have. I know that the board hasn't raised as many concerns, but obviously we've heard from the neighborhood regarding their concerns about the number of parking spaces. So it might make sense just to submit it to you. It's very self-explanatory. It goes into a little bit also about the compact space issue that has been raised in the past and the number of compact spaces. I do want to bring it to the attention of the board that the town zoning bylaw currently allows a maximum of 25% of the parking spaces in off-site parking areas to be compact. We're providing 31%, which isn't a super significant increase. 7 spaces greater than what's currently allowed. Mr. Reardon, I see you shaking your head. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, any space that's not standard size is a compact space.
Indeed.
A space that's the minimum size a compact space can be is not your only compact space. So by our count, 78% of your spaces do not meet the standard size parking space.
Standard size is defined by, what is the dimensions that you're talking about?
I believe it's 9 by 18.
8.5 by 19?
I'm not certain.
Okay. Well, we'll just submit this and then everyone can have their comment that way. How's that?
That makes consummate sense.
Lovely.
And you'll have that to us before the week is out. Is that fair to say?
Hopefully, let's say as soon as possible.
Early next week, not Christmas Eve. Okay, great. Bev, where are we in terms of our availability for a next hearing date on this matter?
Oh, we're into January. I think next week would be unheard of, frankly, with people, with Christmas preparations, in all honesty, but that certainly is not my call. But it seems reasonable to go into the first week, second week of January.
Okay, and what do we have available in the first and second week?
We have both Thursdays.
And what are they?
No, I'm sorry. We have the first Thursday. What's the date? 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's the 6th.
Thank you, Nick. I don't have my calendar in front of me. I appreciate that.
Okay, we have the 6th, and do we have the 13th as well, or is that taken?
I believe that's taken, John, that's taken.
Mr. Freeman, how does continuing this to January 6th Is
Yeah.
that with your schedule and availability?
It works with mine and Jen and Connor. I don't know if anybody from DeMella Schaefer's here, but hopefully it works with your schedule. Silence means yes. Okay, January 6th.
And
I will have to miss my the Feast of the Epiphany where I'm supposed to sing that night in my choral thing, but I also don't want to hold up recognizing the meeting that these meetings have dragged on.
Well,
I don't want
perhaps
to,
we
you know,
could
be
look
the
at another
cause
night.
of that being delayed. So
No,
hold on.
I can do that if
No, hold
necessary.
on, please.
no, Nick, no,
Yes, go ahead.
absolutely not.
Well,
Um,
you know, we could do it on the Sunday like every other church around here, but no, we have to do it on the day. So
It's okay, Nick,
Yeah.
let's, the
Don't worry
board,
about it.
why don't we look at another night that week?
well,
Or another night the next week?
Well,
I
how
mean,
any other night that week is fine for me.
What
then
about
why
the
don't we
fifth?
just go there? How about the Wednesday night before?
I'm tied up Wednesday the 5th.
Okay.
Okay,
How about the 12th?
That's fine with me if it's all right with the applicant. I don't want to really cause the.
you're not going to. Wait, this is an easy fix.
I may have something on the 12th, but I
What
don't
about the
know.
11th?
What's
Told
good for
you.
you, Mr. Freeman?
Yeah,
What's good for you?
sorry. It was on, what did we just say? The 6th, not available. How about Tuesday, the 4th? Was that discussed already? The 4th of January?
That
It
works.
was not. Does that work?
Yes.
Jeffrey, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, realistically, how much work is going to get done between now and then?
Well, then that's my concern as well.
Do you want to go to the following Tuesday?
Which is what, Bev?
That would be the 7th, 8th, 11th, I think.
That sounds good to me.
But I think that's when I have a Swampscott hearing.
Boy, how about 1? Oh, and you can't do 12 and you can't do 13. We can't do 13. All right, so are we into the next week then?
I think we have to be.
I do too. Let me grab my calendar.
Let me just double check.
You know, let me amend what I said, because I don't want to cause delay for all of you and inconvenience and my client, of course. So on the January 11th, I actually do have co-counsel, and their timing might be different if I can attend by Zoom. But in any case, I don't want to hold things up. So I think January 11th was okay, except for me. So I'll now say it's okay for me.
If I may, I think that we have several documents in process right now, and Christmas being on a Saturday, I think that we'll be able to make significant progress by the 4th, if that is still an option.
Fine with me.
I can do it. It's just a question of whether it would be more efficient to do it on the 11th and have more time.
More information, yeah.
I mean, so if the bulk of the meeting, the next meeting is going to be Attorney Gallivan's presentation, it sounds like he's ready for that. So.
But Jen, you do have to just do some work on the pro formas and your consultant finishing up.
That's very easy. We can get numbers together by next week for that.
Yeah, exactly. But so, and I'm mindful of the concern by the board members that, we don't want to not have things in advance, but I do agree with Jen. I think that it's going to be relatively simple.
All righty, is it the 4th or the 11th?
Which, Mr. Bomer and Mr. Reardon, we haven't heard from you. Is the 4th or the 11th the better date for you?
Probably the 4th. I have to confirm. The 11th, I know I can't do. The 4th is a possibility. About 60% certain I can do it.
And Mr. Reardon, Sean?
I'll make myself available. My son's coming back from a ski trip one of those days, but I'm not sure which one. I'll figure it out though.
Hmm.
Okay, Jeffrey, are you available the 4th?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the stuff though, it can't show up on the 3rd, all right? It's just,
Understood.
yeah, okay, that means it needs to be here next, week between Christmas and New Year's, so. I don't know, all right.
That's usually very difficult to accomplish.
So what are the documents? Can we just go through them really quickly just so that we're clear? The numbers for the feasibility, that's one of them.
Yes.
The parking is 2.
Yep.
We've got the information from Connor, which I believe he said can get done at the beginning of next week. Connor, is that accurate?
Let me just.
I believe so. I need to confirm with DPW, but yes, I believe so.
Let me make a suggestion, and Jen, you can yell at me afterwards, but it's just 1 week, and I forgot that there's still some, I was going to say tweaking. I don't mean to say that it's necessarily that easy, but discussion between Connor and Mr. Reardon. I do think the 11th is the best. I certainly don't want to get in a situation where, it's just, I think it makes more sense, Jen. I really do. So I would suggest the 11th.
Okay, well, I think that's, it makes sense to me. I think we'll accomplish more on the 11th, and I think we'll have a frustrating session on the 4th and be extended to the 11th. So why don't we do the 11th at 7 o'clock? And hopefully everyone can work out any difficulties before then. And I understand that Miss Susan Spratt's report will also be disseminated to all of the parties early next week. Jeff, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I want to talk about, I wasn't going to raise this, but I want to talk about the parking. I know we've talked about this before, and the parking that's in the lot today and what's happening to that parking and how that parking might be tied in to the, how's that tied into the uses that are up on Adams Street? I don't have a feeling like we've tied that up, but so to Tim's earlier point about the parking management plan, and I know there's some design issues with the parking as well, but I think it would be helpful to have that all in the same place so that and the reason why I think that's important is I want to understand what's happening to the parking, not just on site, but off site, because we're displacing parking that's there. And then I want to understand how that might affect, if at all, the properties on Adams.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I agree with you.
Yep, I'm writing it down. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Attorney Galvin has his hand up.
Bob, yes, I can't see you, but go ahead. Delighted to hear from you.
Yes, sorry about that. I just wanted to say that my engineer was not available on the 4th, but that's been taken care of. The matter is moving to the 11th, so we'll be happy to be there for that. And with respect to the parking, I think there's also a potential impact on the Franklin Street and Bassett Street neighbors, because if there's not enough parking there now, they're going to end up in our neighborhood. So if that could be included, I would appreciate it.
Oh, that's a point well taken. Okay, then we're going to adjourn this hearing until the 11th of January at 7 p.m. in the evening. And the board wishes everyone a most happy Christmas season and a happy 2022.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, guys. Have a
See you.
So we're adjourned. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night, Bev. Thank you.